says that research by the think tank, the Centre for Progressive Policy, has discovered that the figure, which is called the fertility rate, has dropped by 18.8% in a year. The number represents the biggest proportion fall across the G7 in 12 years, between 2010 and the latest statistics from 2022. According to the analysis, Italy saw the second largest fall, followed by the United States, Canada, France, and then Japan, while Germany saw a rise. And I wonder why Germany is seeing a rise. Could it be particular groups that are only having children in Germany, by any chance? Because it turns out the native populations of Europe are not having kids. Here's an alarming graph that was produced in the Daily Skeptic that I tweeted out yesterday. In the last year, only 56% of live births were to white British. So almost a majority of live births in England are now from not the native population. Which means the rate at which there is an inverse demographic pyramid for the native population in their own homeland, it is increasing. And the year which white Britons were projected to be a minority in their own homeland of 2066 is having years knocked off the clock. The higher the rate of immigration increases, and it will be still very high this year, you can just see it and feel it if you travel through London. It feels like the entire world has been emptied out into my capital city. And also by the virtue of the white British not having their own children. Now, the ONS doesn't publish stats by ethnicity for fertility rates. What the ONS does publish is the distribution of births by ethnicity. And as you can see in this chart, 56% were British. Now, that is a decline by about 18% from 2021, when 74% of births were to white British mothers. So thank you very much to the Conservative Party for flooding us full of record numbers of hostile foreign dependents, criminals, and also third worlders who have far larger family sizes. And I care about that because, again, if people are the custodians of a culture, well, they're not transmitting my culture, my civilization, my history, my laws onto their children. They're doing theirs. And so they're just recreating the conditions of their less preferable homelands. So they're ruining my economy, they're disregarding my history, and they're calling me a racist and discriminating against me and making me pay for it for the pleasure, which is just great. And again, those are the factors, I think, which actually discourage the native population from having children more than these purely material factors. The material factors might have some influence, but if the world on your doorstep is changing at a dizzying rate, when does it feel like the right time that you want to bring children into it? It's difficult. It's very difficult. And so we have a league table of the countries that are producing more children in the UK than the native population, it turns out. 1 in 3 babies from England and Wales were born to mothers from outside the UK. So this is not just an ethnic breakdown, this is a national origin breakdown. The Daily Mail provides the following table. India had 21,513 live births in the UK last year. Pakistan, 17,715. Romania, 13,717. Nigeria, 12,312. Poland, 9,420. Bangladesh, 7,889. Albania, 3,891. Afghanistan, 3,388. Ghana, 3,363, and then the USA at 3,229. The Americans are better, but again, depends on which Americans. According to the ONS, 31.8% of live births in the UK in 2023 were for non-UK mothers, a slight increase from 30.3% in 2022. The proportion was also an increase from 26.5% from a decade earlier, after passing the quarter mark 25.1% in 2010. So for a long time, this number has been increasing, and we know that generally people from foreign diasporas have more children per family than your average English woman, and so the government of the day, which is meant to be representing the interests of the native British people, not that they ever do, knew this, they had the data on this, it kept being published, and yet they only put their foot flat down on the immigration pedal instead. So we can only conclude that they are, whether or not they're abiding by that UN document, conducting a plan of replacement migration. That is the technical term. It's not a conspiracy theory. More than a third, 37.3% of live births, were to parents where either one or both of them were born outside the UK, up from 35.8% in 2022. India, as we saw, remained the most common country of birth for non-UK mothers, 3.6% of all live births, and fathers, 3.9% in England and Wales last year. Ghana entered the top 10, knocking out Germany. which is disappointing for the Germans, but there you go. Greg Seeley, head of the Population Health Monitoring at the ONS, said that the data does not give a picture of a family's ethnicity or migration history. Really? Okay. He said, almost a third of babies born in 2023 in England and Wales were born to non-UK women, a slight increase on the percentage in 2022. This is a continuation of the long-term trend of the percentage of live births born to non-UK mothers. It's generally increasing. While our birth data shows us the parent's country of birth, it doesn't give us a picture of the family's ethnicity or migration history, and it's worth noting that not all women born outside the UK will be recent immigrants. Ah! Silly me! If they've been here for 10 years, they're obviously as British as you and me. No, they're carrying cultural baggage. They speak different languages, they have different religions, they cook different food, they come from different legal traditions, and they don't all see themselves as a part of Britain. They're not, as we can see, because the numbers of mothers and fathers are roughly the same, marrying into the tribe. And the reason they're not is because at the numbers that they're transporting themselves into, they're living among themselves in ethnic enclaves, and if you didn't subject the British population to a deluge of propaganda about mixed ethnicity relationships, say, in every single advert with the diversity requirement, organically, most people would marry and have children within their own ethnicities. Because the majority of people are attracted to people of genetic proximity. Not identical, obviously, because otherwise you run into problems like in Pakistan, where cousin marriage is rife, or in Bradford, where cousin marriage is rife because, see, Pakistan. Instead, what people do is I think it's about 90 to 95% date within their own nation and their own ethnic subgroup. Even in America, where ethnic diversity is much larger than that of the UK, because it's more to do with American citizenship than... American citizenship is, okay, until 1965, sure, but largely defined as a legal designation than an ethnic designation, as in the old world in Europe, or in Japan, or even in Israel. But even in America, where ethnic diversity is larger, that number still remains relatively constant. You've not got 50% mixed race relationships. Still largely black men and women having children, for example, or white men and women, Hispanic men and women. So the organic desires of the native population, of most populations, are to marry within their own ethnicities, within their own cultures, within their own traditions. And so, yeah, it does tell you a lot, actually, about the ethnic and national origin of mothers and fathers having children. Because if you're going to import people at record numbers to make up shortfalls in the labour market and to substitute for sub-replacement birth rates, then the parents and the children, even if they're in Britain, are going to be of their homeland. Because they marry in that ethnic subgroup. They raise their children according to the culture that they left behind. And so, Britain is going to become some sort of hideous multicultural tapestry, or the most dominant faction is going to win out and rule all of these ethnicities beneath the iron fist of the caliphate. And neither of those visions of the future are my country, my homeland, the place I like to live. They don't reflect my values. I don't feel represented. And this is all being done in the name of, well, we've got to make sure the numbers on the spreadsheet add up. Doesn't matter about culture at all. Same seems to be happening in Germany. German birth rate has plummeted, as it says immigration fails to fill the gap, even though it's slightly ticked up, according to the G7. By Germany, in 2021, Germany had 1.58 live births for women. Now the trend, as of last year, is 1.35. So you can almost guarantee that it'll be not German women having the lion's share of the remaining children. And let's look at the long-term context. The Times actually has a half-decent article here. So it provides context for when the records began in 1938. Just before the Second World War, the fertility rate was 1.84 children per woman. As the war ended and the baby boomer generation happened, it rose from 614,000 in 1939 to 821,000 in 1946. The number of women aged between 15 and 44 stayed at about 10 million. There's a women of childbearing age, according to the ONS, meaning the fertility rate rose from 1.73 in 1939 to 2.47 in 1946. The average age of first birth for women in 1946 was 23. More than half, or 52% of women born in 1946, had a child before the age of 24, compared with 32% among women born in 1920, and compared with under 50% of women by the age of 30 now. Fewer than 1 in 10 women of this generation had no children at all, compared with about 1 in 5 women among those born in 1920 or 1969, according to the ONS. But then, The introduction of the Abortion Act in 1967 and the increasing availability of oral contraception gave women greater access to birth control. This contributed to a decline in births, and the fertility rate fell to 2.47% in 1969. Now, it's worthy of mentioning that other countries in the 70s, around the same time, experienced the oil shock and mass economic downturn. You can see Stephen Shaw's documentary Birth Gap for this. And so that also contributed, because the access to abortion and birth control would not explain why South Korea and Japan had their birth rates fall far faster than the UK, US, and Europe, and continue to be even lower today, because the rate of use of birth control in Japan is still single digits. It's relatively uncommon. It's more of a cultural thing. And so, yes, the economic factors matter, but I think a kind of cultural malaise, a definition of oneself as a purely rational economic actor seeking to maximize material prosperity and individual autonomy, makes it very difficult to rationally plan when you can have a child. And birth control and abortion only facilitate to think of the child as something to be rationally planned, and therefore as a lifestyle accessory or as an unwanted and imposed dependent care burden to be ridded of so that it doesn't get in the way of your career. That's how children are thought of in modernity, and it's because of the economy and the same sort of liberal blank slatism that informs things like that UN document we were just reading from. By 1973, the total fertility rate had fallen beneath the replacement level for the first time since the 1940s and has remained lower ever since. Same holds for Japan, Germany, and Italy. By 1971, more than half of the women aged 16 to 64 were employed, while by 1994, almost two-thirds, 62% of working-age women were in employment. And this is crucial. Unfortunately, we must try and square the circle of enabling more female agency, economic opportunities, and education, which has produced some excellent women, of course, I'm not contesting that. Mary Harrington, Louise Perry, Nina Power, Charlie Bentley Astor, my own missus. But this does get in the way of having families in the prime fertility years that women themselves say they want. And so what we've got is an economy and an education system which causes children to be rationally planned, and you never feel, with the increasing demands of the economy, as your work life eats into your personal life, you never feel that the time is right, especially when you're subjected to so much cultural and demographic change. However, the populations which aren't thinking of themselves as individual, autonomous, rational actors, either as bearers of a civilization or constituents of a religion with an eye on world dominance, or even just people that can afford to just mill about in train stations without needing to go to work every day and act on pure animalistic impulse, they don't need to rationally plan it, therefore they're the ones having all the kids. Especially if you're subsidising their social housing, which we are for example, British Somalians. 72% of them are in social housing. I say British Somalians. Somalians in Britain. So they don't need to rationally plan, therefore they're the one having more children, and also if you're importing them at higher and higher numbers, you're getting this sort of twin squeeze effect of immigration and then the children of immigrants naturally displacing the native population, who are getting older, not having their own kids, and that itself is then the reason to import more immigrants who will then have more children and completely change the demographic and cultural composition of a country like the UK. So, fewer than two-thirds of women born in 1969, Gen X, got married by the age of 30, and by the mid-1990s, more than a third of children were born outside of marriage. The number of births fell from about 700,000 a year in 1990 to just over 600,000 in 2000, and the fertility rate during this time fell from 1.84 to 1.65. Only 20% of women born in 1997, that's us, on the cusp between millennials and Gen Z, that would be Gen Z, had a child before the age of 25. That is lower than any earlier generation, continuing the trend towards later births. And it says, as of the statistics that we've been citing, there were 591,072 births in England and Wales last year, the lowest number since 1997, and only the 11th time in 172 years that the number has dipped below 600,000. The number of women of childbearing age is at its highest, however, with almost 11.9 million women aged between 15 and 44 in England and Wales in 2023. So, it's predominantly English and Welsh women who are not having children. And instead, it's a lot of immigrant families who are having more children per family. Per capita, the immigrant birth rate is much higher than that of the native population. Combine that with replacement migration, and what you get is irreversible demographic, cultural, and economic change.
Thank you for watching that clip from Tomlinson Talks. If you liked that and you would like to see more, you can get the full 90-minute show every week on a Wednesday afternoon, live from 3 p.m., only on lotuseaters.com, and all of the other content that my colleagues produce behind the paywall for as little as £5 a month. Thank you very much for supporting us, and I hope to see you there. Until next time, goodbye.